may rise. Good afternoon, and be seated, please, everyone. Goodness, I am delighted to welcome so many guests to this courtroom for a very special ceremony. This afternoon, Governor Byrne, colleagues in the Judiciary, current and retired, members of the family and friends of Chief Justice Zazzali, members of the bar and the court family, it is a pleasure to see so many friendly and smiling faces here today. I don't have to tell you this is not the way it always looks when we are working our way through oral arguments during this courtroom. There's so much to say about the unveiling of a portrait of someone who has served with distinction in many positions in public life. Chief Justice Zazzali's professional accomplishments are well known, and his work on the Supreme Court, first as an Associate Justice and then Chief, is but one part of a lifelong commitment to public service. Before joining the court, he served as Chief of the Appeals Division of the Essex County Prosecutor's Office, General Counsel to the New Jersey Sport and Exposition Authority, Chairman of the State Commission of Investigation, and Attorney General. And his service to the public continues through assignments to the Supreme Court on committees that he willingly makes time for. The thoughtful body of legal work that the Chief Justice authored while a member of the court merits a discussion of its own, and I believe that Chief Justice Ports may touch on that briefly this afternoon. In Chief Zazzali's many decisions, you can see the abiding sense of idealism and fairness that was evident in the young law school graduate in 1962 who headed south to try to tackle civil unrest and labor strife in the Carolinas, the Virginias, and Georgia. And in the 5 decades since, Chief Zazzali has remained true to those principles. When we look at his portrait in the years ahead, we'll search for signs of those qualities. But I'm hopeful the artist captured other traits as well. I hope the portrait depicts the unfailingly caring and polite person that we know, that it captures the mischievous sense of humor and wit that we also enjoy, that it reveals a glimpse of his dedication to family, which has always meant much more than any job to him, and that it conveys the integrity and propriety that he stands for. Now, that's a tall task for an artist. It only highlights how remarkable it is for a single person to embody all of those qualities in real life. It's fitting that your portrait will hang in the Supreme Court's conference room, where various committees regularly meet to work on enhancing our system of justice, and where justices meet to wrestle with difficult and important questions of law. Your gracious, warm smile will no doubt inspire the judges and justices who gaze at it for generations to come. Chief, we're honored to celebrate this uplifting day with you and your entire family and friends, and on behalf of the entire court, I wish you congratulations. There are a number of distinguished guests who'd like the opportunity to say a few words before we turn the podium over to you. And it's a special treat to welcome the Honorable Deborah T. Poritz, whose portrait as Chief Justice now adorns the walls of the conference room. Chief Poritz.
May it please the court. I think the last time I said that was in the mid-1990s. First, I want to welcome everyone. It is with great pleasure that I greet you all, the justices and judges of our Supreme Court, the retired justices who have joined us today, Governor Byrne, the Zazzali family and friends, and of course, the judges, the law clerks, and the staff who are a part of Justice Zazzali's judicial family. I have not named you all individually, because that would take up the full 4 minutes Chief Justice Zazzali has allotted me, but I was sorely tempted. Today is a joyous occasion. By the presentation of Chief Justice Zazzali's portrait, we celebrate a life of dedication to the law and to public service, a life that is an example to all of us in this room. And indirectly, we celebrate the court on which he sat and the judicial system over which he presided. The framework established under the Constitution of 1947 made the judiciary a co-equal branch of government, independent of the other branches, and free to do its work without bias or political influence. It is, however, the men and women of the judiciary who guard the integrity and the impartiality of the justice system. Chief Justice Zazzali stands as a leader among his peers. I once joked that one day I would be hung in the court's conference room with the Chief Justices who had served before me, and of course with Justice Brennan, who holds a special place there as of right. Now it is Chief Justice Zazzali's turn to be hung, and to peer down, as we all do, at the members of the court who follow us. I like to think that we each, in our own way, send to the justices at their work messages that speak of the love of the court as an institution, messages about the dedication of the men and women who sat with us, and about the search for justice and compassion through the precedents of the past, understood in the context of the difficult questions of the present. Chief Justice Zazzali, I will add, will send his messages spiced with a bit of gentle humor to diffuse any tension that may have crept into the discussion around the table. Chief Justice Zazzali was a justice on our court for 5.5 years and Chief Justice for 8.5 months. He made his mark. By the time he became chief, he had established himself as a labor lawyer and a dedicated public servant. As Chief Justice Rabner mentioned, he was a prosecutor under Brendan Byrne in Hudson County, general counsel to the Sports Authority with his brother, chair of the board of the State Commission on Investigation, and then from 1981 to 1982, New Jersey Attorney General. He has been a member of the Disciplinary Review Board of the Supreme Court and is now vice chair of the Advisory Committee on Judicial Conduct. He was nominated in May 2000 by Governor Whitman to serve as a justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court and sworn in later that month, and then, as the newspapers put it, promoted to Chief Justice by Governor Corzine, sworn in on October 26, 2006. These are the bare facts. Facts Chief Justice Zazzali wanted me to skip, but I could not, so I skimmed. They tell you something about what he brought to the court, the wealth of experience that marked him and shaped him. They help us to understand who he is. He also brought that humor I mentioned, and a kindness and a concern for those with whom he worked and those who came before the court. I had known him earlier, not well, but in a very special way. When I became Attorney General in 1994, he called me. As a former holder of that office, he understood, in a way few people could, the perils of being Attorney General. He told me that I would wake up at night worrying about the responsibilities and decisions I faced, but that this was normal. It meant that I cared, and I would find a way through to a fair result. It was his kindness that reached me then, and I will never forget his words. Later on the court, he wrote little notes filled with advice and jokes, and made the inevitable stress of the work less overwhelming. Sometimes he gently let us all know that we should not take ourselves too seriously, and we laughed and got down to work. He always did his best, gave of himself, tried himself to work through the problems he faced, honestly and fairly. Chief Justice Zazzali wrote opinions that were carefully crafted, based in precedent, and focused on the rights of the parties before the court. He understood the law against discrimination to protect school children from bias-based bullying by their peers. He spoke of the need to liberally construe New Jersey's class action rules so as to foster the goals of judicial economy, cost effectiveness, and equally important, to level the playing field as much as possible for those with few resources and little power. And his discussion of eminent domain in Galanthan Realty has been cited throughout the country as a principled review of government takings in the context of urban development. There is so much more, but I will be chased from the podium soon. I can only add that his stewardship of our court is now part of our history, and we are proud of its place there. Chief Justice Zazzali was once asked about what he hoped his legacy would be. He said that he would like people to remember that he worked hard, protected the reputation of the court, and maintained fairness in his administrative decisions and judicial opinions. A modest answer. I will add that Chief Justice Zazzali leaves a legacy of integrity and compassion, and that he served with humility and wisdom. We who worked with him are the richer for that experience. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention Chief Justice Zazzali's family. They, his wife Eileen, and his children and grandchildren are the joy of his life. He taught the rest of us about the meaning of family. I know that they, his family members, are delighted to celebrate his achievements with us this afternoon. They are, in a word, quelling with us. Thank you.
Next, we welcome Bill Kastner, who clerked for Chief Zazzali in his first term on the court. Bill?
Good afternoon to the current members of the court, to the former members of the court, to Governor Byrne, to all the guests, and to the Chief's family here today. Imagine throughout your lifetime if you could combine the very best attributes of your most caring teacher, your favorite boss, your most thoughtful friend, a Jesuit priest, your most inspiring sports coach, the hardest worker you've ever seen, a late-night comedian, and the very best qualities of your own father. Put all those together, and that reflects exactly how I feel about my mentor, Chief Justice Zazzali. 22 attorneys have had the great privilege of saying, I was a law clerk for the Honorable James R. Zazzali. I consider myself lucky to be one of them. The Chief was and continues to be a role model to each and every one of us. And that is because the Chief taught us many important lessons, not just lessons about the profession, but lessons in life that have impacted our careers, helped us become better attorneys, and made clerking for the Chief such a special experience. Here are my 5 favorite lessons. Number 1, I'd like to say that Leo DeRocher was a liar, because as today evidence is, sometimes nice guys finish first. To some, the stereotypical attorney only achieves success through mean-spirited temperament, unscrupulous practices, and advocacy that can be best be described as banging on pots and pans as loud as you can. Basically, that being overly forceful and rude is a sign of strength, and that displaying respect, being ethical, or exercising diplomacy is a sign of weakness. In fact, young attorneys who had the benefit of watching the Chief in action came away with a clear, unmistakable, and completely opposite conclusion: that being nice, being respected, is a far more effective way of operating as an attorney. Or, as the managing partner of Gibbons, Pat Dunnigan, once said to me, can you name a single thing Jim Zazzali has ever wanted in life that he hasn't gotten? I mean, it's scary. Is it possible to be more dangerous or more effective as an attorney when everyone in the world loves you? My goodness, who can say no to Jim Zazzali? It's brilliant. And here's the best part. It's calculated. Okay, not really. There is authenticity there. Lesson number 2, knowledge is power. The chief was extraordinarily generous with what he would share with us as law clerks. And always with this strict disclaimer, now you can't tell us all about this. And we didn't, because we understood the chief was giving us a valuable early lesson on confidentiality in the profession. But he was also trusting us with information, knowing perhaps that we could best make recommendations and try to inform decision-making if we weren't doing research in a vacuum. So consequently, the chief wanted us as law clerks to feel the court, to touch the court, to know where other justices privately saw strengths or weaknesses in arguments on a case, so he could test his own line of thinking. That level of trust was really appreciated because as a law clerk, you spend months on a case, you do research on issues, you become wedded to issues, and sometimes you may not even learn about the issue until the opinion is published. But the chief kept us informed every step of the way. And because of that level of access that he afforded us, I feel we all benefited, not just from seeing his own sound judgment and decision-making, but it offered us insight and exposure to the other great justices who sat on the court, their strategic thinking, their writing skills, and their professionalism. Lesson number 3, take the profession very seriously, but don't take yourself so seriously. Now, I need not comment on the chief's legendary sense of humor, or question whether these days it would be at all appropriate to berate a law clerk's Irish heritage. But the chief had a work hard, play hard mentality. All business and no nonsense when it mattered, with room, of course, for some lighter moments. Some of the jokes at times might have even come at the expense of some of his colleagues, but Chief, trust me, I will take those comments to the grave. But speaking of graves, one of my favorite clerkship moments was receiving a draft opinion from the chief on a case called Trinity Cemetery versus Wall Township. Now, I assume the chief was trying to keep me on my toes and ensure I was doing my job editing. But as I was reviewing his draft opinion, I noticed some interesting choice of words. The first red flag was when I noticed he referred to mausoleums as die-rises. Then I noticed the chief described the statute at issue as one that was, quote-unquote, fatally flawed. He then faulted one of the parties for taking a stale issue and resurrecting it. I was onto something, I thought, when he described one of the arguments in the case as largely lifeless. But the clincher was in the last section of the draft opinion, which he entitled Ending, in which the chief modestly described his opinion as being one of grave import. Lesson number 4, and the Chief Justice Ports and Chief Justice Rabner touched upon this. Family first. It's difficult to spend any amount of time with the chief without knowing how strongly he feels about his beautiful family. Mara, Jimmy, Robert, Courtney, and Kevin. He's always talking about you. So proud of everything you've done. And we as law clerks are very grateful that you let us borrow him during his time on the court. And Chief, in terms of your beautiful wife, Eileen, I know you met her at the Monmouth Racetrack as an usher, and all I could say is, boy, was that your lucky day. But as lucky as you are to have such an amazing family, Chief, I know how they feel, which is very lucky to have you too. And as law clerks, we felt immediately folded into the greater Zazzali family, sometimes not by choice. I'd be dispatched to the chief's sister's house on Easter in Spring Lake to go over a draft memo, or sent to Rumson to move a couple boxes. John and Dina, remember that. Or my favorite, to drive the old 1980s era wood-paneled station wagon to the auto repair shop in Red Bank. And after repairs were complete, repairs which, by the way, almost certainly exceeded the value of the car, I would return the car to Chambers and pull them up to the reserved parking spot in Red Bank that read, Reserved New Jersey Supreme Court. I was mortified. To me, this is the equivalent of walking into the Four Seasons with a sleeveless undershirt on. And as I would exit the vehicle, I would quickly explain to all the smokers outside who just witnessed me pull up, this is not my car. This is not my car. But that was part of the chief's charm. Nothing too flashy. Who cares how it looked? It got the job done for me and my family. And in the spirit of treating his clerks like family, he invites them to a get-together every year at his beach club. And is there a conversation you have with the chief when he's not asking you about yourself and your own family? This reflects who he truly is, one of the most selfless, caring individuals I've ever been fortunate to know. Finally, lesson number 5, looking out for the little guy. Chief taught me that there are so many barriers in the lives of the underprivileged that the law ought not be one of them. Whether it was his views on labor issues, affordable housing, discrimination, or even something as simple as an elderly couple who didn't fully understand their fire insurance policy. The type of compassion the chief displayed was contagious. And although the chief had the ability to hire law clerks from, frankly, wherever he wanted to, given his networking and contacts in the profession, I'm personally grateful the chief rolled the dice on some of the kids from the Jersey schools who might not have had the same credentials on paper as some of the other peers. But regardless of where we attended, I feel like a Zazzali law clerk was always hungry to learn about the law and hungry to learn from him. Now, in my case, it was a disastrous experiment, but I'm grateful he gave many of us the chance to have one of the best years of our lives clerking for him on the New Jersey Supreme Court. I'm still so proud to say that. But despite all those lessons, the biggest impact the chief has had on me is not through his words, it's just the way he conducts himself. Whether he's talking to a young kid working at the Beach Club Cabana or one of the partners at Gibbons, he's looking him in the eye the same exact way and with the same exact level of respect. He's got the type of Cooperstown credentials and accomplishments to be arrogant, but he's not. He's one of the warmest individuals we all know. He's a handsome man who never seems to age. He's a gentleman. He's so thoughtful and caring, and he has just the spirit about him that's just indescribable. It makes you look up to him, it makes you want to be like him, and it makes you maybe one day, if you're really, really lucky, have even a shred of the reputation of a Jim Zazzali. Chief, if I have your permission, I'd like to maybe read this last paragraph to him, if that's not disrespectful.
Not at all.
Chief, what a gift you have given us as law clerks. Just by virtue of our association with you, however brief that may have been, the opportunity to work under you has brought instant and immediate credibility to each and every one of our careers. On our resume, for the rest of our lives, we get to say, I clerked for Justice Jim Zazzali. Congratulations.
Thank you, Bill. We're pleased to hear next from Chief Zazzali's dear friend and partner in the law, Bob Fagella.
Chief Justice Rabner and members of the court, distinguished members of the Judiciary, the colleagues and friends, and obviously Jim's family. I know we're here to talk about the Chief Justice, but I thought it might be appropriate to spend a few moments going back in time as to how he and I crossed paths. Because before he was the Chief Justice, as was stated by many of the other speakers before, he was the Attorney General, and he had a very successful career in private practice. In 1981, which is about 33 years ago, or 32 years ago, Jimmy was the Attorney General, and I was a very young Deputy Attorney General slaving in the Attorney General's office, the Division of Law. And I had an assignment. My assignment was to represent all the state colleges in the state, and also because they had so many meetings, I sort of became supposedly an expert on the Open Public Meetings Act, which was a new law called the Sunshine Law. Anyway, anyone who's ever been a DAG knows that one thing you don't see very much as a DAG is the general. And so I certainly never did. But lo and behold, one day, I got a telephone call from the general's office asking me would I like to accompany him on a speech he was going to be making to the Philadelphia Press Club about a new law, the SHIELD law, to protect reporters. So I could have been knocked off of my seat. I couldn't believe I got this telephone call, but I said, I'll be there. What do I do? And they said, well, the helicopter will pick you up outside the State House Annex. I could not believe that this was happening, but I took it up, as he said. I went outside the State House Annex. I meet the helicopter, no Jim Zazzali, of course. And then a few minutes later, a state trooper car pulls up. Out comes this man carrying a big sheaf of papers. He gets into the helicopter, walks right past me, doesn't say anything except, very busy, I'll try to get to you in a bit. I said, okay. We take a helicopter trip down to Philadelphia, which was great. And not a word is said to me. He's sitting in the back working. Get off of the helicopter in Philadelphia. I thought he'd start to talk to me then. But instead, there's a Pennsylvania State Trooper car. We get out of the helicopter. We get into the trooper car. And the next thing I know, we're on our way to an Italian restaurant in South Philadelphia. Still hasn't said anything to me. We now get into the restaurant. The owner of the restaurant's there. We get out of the car. We go into the restaurant. I was sure he was going to talk to me, but instead he said, we have to order. We don't have a lot of time. I said, okay. We order. So finally, he looks up from his menu and he says, okay, tell me everything you know about the Shield Law. I said, the Shield Law? That's the law about protecting newspaper reporters? And he said, aren't you the person in the office that's supposed to be the expert in the Shield Law? I said, no, the Sunshine Law. You could have heard a pin drop in his pasta. Anyway, his speech went well. I figured that's the last time I'll ever see him again. But 2 years later, I got a telephone call, and he asked me if I'd want to come and interview with the firm. I did. I became an associate, and over those next years, we became law partners and friends. And during that period of time, as was stated by some of the other speakers here, Bill and the Chief, he held a number of important positions in the state, besides Attorney General. He was a member of the State Commission of Investigation, and then he became the chairman of the SCI. He was the head of the Nuclear Freeze Movement, which isn't known by too many people. He was appointed by this court to be the head of the Disciplinary Review Board. He was appointed to serve as a special master by the federal courts for prison overcrowding. And of course, he became ultimately the Associate Justice and then the Chief Justice of this court. And like the other speakers, to be serious, I had an opportunity to see him up close and personal over all that period of time. And I saw his qualities of intelligence and his wisdom. I got a chance to see his prodigious work ethics, which everyone's familiar with, his devotion to his family, his humility in instances when he doesn't have to be humble, and his loyalty to his friends. Most everybody here is probably friends with him and knows how much that can mean. Of course, he has a great sense of humor and an incredible number of irritating and aggravating personal traits which could make you crazy. But through all of that time, I think it was stated before, and I'll say it again on his behalf, he always has a sense of what he would call fundamental fairness, the sense of trying to remember who he is and that not everybody is in that situation, a sense of compassion and concern for the little guy. And I think most importantly, what we'd call colloquially the decision or the desire to do the right thing. So it's been quite a ride for 30 years. It turned out to be a lot better than the initial helicopter trip. And I thought, before we do this unveiling, I know that 50 years from now, there'll be justices in conference and looking up and remembering that you were the Chief Justice. I also hope, though, that at that time, they know all the qualities that got you there. So congratulations very much on behalf of everybody here.
I'd like to invite the chief and his family to the well of the court to unveil the portrait, after which, Chief Zazzali, you can have as much time as you like to offer your rebuttal argument.
Chief Justice Rabner, Chief Justice Ports, Governor Byrne, Associate Justices, past and present, judges, family and friends, and Chief Justice Ports, Bill and Bob, thank you for your comments. I appreciate them so very much, but I'm reminded of the passenger on the Titanic who buzzed the steward and said, "Steward, I rang for ice water, but this is ridiculous." It was very nice. Picking up on something that Chief Justice Ports was talking about, Eileen, some time ago when we were scheduling this, said, you know, you could get a much bigger crowd if you refer to this as a public hanging rather than a public unveiling. I think that painting is a forgery. But it is for sale, if anyone's interested. You know, it's too late, I suspect, but I was thinking, given developments around here, of asking the artist if he could put a beard on my face there. Okay? I consulted with Justice Albin, and he said that under the circumstances, a beard would not make me look any wiser. You know, they dedicated a statue to Governor Byrne 2 weeks ago in the Essex County Courthouse, and his son Tom remarked at the time that it should have a button on the statute so that any time you press the button, it would tell a joke. I think Chief Justice Ports is afraid that I'll put a button on there and it'll tell a bad pun. She often kidded me about. Actually, Chief Justice Ports, for all those nice things she said about me, really felt that my emotional and intellectual development was halted at age 14. But she never quite put it that way. The portrait is Scott Nickerson, who did this portrait, could not be here today because he's in Disney World with his family, but he called this morning to wish me well and said that he was in Frontierland in the Wild West. I said, gee, you might just as well have come to Trenton. As you know, the portrait will be placed on the wall of the conference room behind where the justices are sitting, and that's a good thing, I suppose, because as they're sitting there and look up at it from time to time, they may find and draw inspiration from it, and as they're debating and deciding difficult questions, I hope they look up that painting, but I think what will happen is they'll look up and say, what would Debbie do? My comments will be brief. I was privileged to be a member of one of the most respected institutions in the nation. Although it can become tedious, I suppose, when people say thank you, I think thank yous, for me at least, are what today is all about. Silent gratitude is of not much use to anyone. Meister Eckhart, the great medieval mystic who roamed around caves for 30 years trying to figure out what life was all about, once said that in all of life you only need to know one prayer, and that prayer, quite simply, is thank you. So I say thank you to all those who made this possible. First, to the governors who had misplaced confidence in me, appointed me to various positions, Governor Kane, Governor Whitman, Governor Florio, Governor Corzine, and of course to Governor Byrne. As I said at my swearing in 13 years ago, and some of you heard it, Governor Byrne, thank you for everything. You gave me a huge start. You appointed Andy and me assistant prosecutors. You appointed as general counsel to the sports complex, and then you named me the Attorney General. Gee, Governor, now I'm so sorry I never voted for you. What do I miss about Trenton? That's a question that retired justices and judges often hear. I miss the justices with whom I served for 7 wonderful years on the Porridge Court. I thank both her and them for their wisdom and their generosity. I thank Chief Justice Rabner and this court for continuing to hold high both the banner and the reputation of this court. To my law clerks for their dedication and for their commitment to me and to the court, thank you, and thank you for putting up with my idiosyncrasies. I remember my first year, as you heard, Bill Kastner was among those law clerks. And there they were, what a great example, working so hard all morning long, inside chambers, on bench memos and cert petitions. And then all afternoon long, outside chambers, playing stickball. Until my neighbor, Judge Cuff, if you recall, came to the rescue and straightened them out. You had the gumption to tell them to settle down until you started playing stickball. Where is Donna? Let me thank Donna and Pete for making this possible today. And will you all join me? She's the glue that helps to hold everything together, and I thank her and all my assistants, to Priscilla, to Annette, to Sharon, and to the many others, and to the staff who took good care of me. To the assignment judges and the other judges here today and not here today for their support over the years. To the lawyers in the Zazzali and the Gibbons law firms, first my colleagues and now my friends. And most of all to my family, to my mom and dad, to my brother Andy and sister Judy, for their love, their tolerance, to Mara, to Jimmy, to Robert, to Courtney and Kevin. Reference was made before to my legacy, but as I said at that swearing in 13 years ago, they are my legacy, and that applies even more so today than then. They eclipse everything that I've accomplished. Most of all to Eileen. So many of us often say that we could never have achieved what we've achieved without the support of our spouse. With Eileen, as with so many others, it is more than support. It's the added element of sacrifice, given the opportunities that she gave up. Just by way of example, some of you know that of her extraordinary skills at the piano. When you add that gift to her singing voice, her sense of humor, her very presence, that combination would have opened many doors for her. She knew that, I knew that, but she put that talent aside and concentrated on my well-being and our children's well-being. They and I are infinitely better because of that sacrifice. I only hope that in some small way we have made this journey worthwhile for her. To sum all of this up, in that court's conference room, as was said before, there are 7 Chief Justices whose portraits are up on that wall. They're up there because of what they did. My portrait is going up on that wall because of what all of you have done. So thank you. I have just a few final thoughts, and echoing perhaps some of what Chief Justice Porridge said about this court. I will be discreet, I will be prudent, but I do ask that we consider today to be a celebration of the New Jersey Judiciary rather than a recognition of one one very lucky person. That judiciary was, is today, and will continue to be one of the stars in the firmament. I speak not only of the Supreme Court, I speak of the great men and women in the trenches, in the law division, and in the Chancery Division. I speak of those judges who have so distinguished our appellate division to make it one of the most esteemed intermediate appellate courts in the nation. I only ask that all of you respectfully stay the course, no matter what the makeup of the court, no matter what the jurisprudence or ideology may be individually or collectively. It seems to me that's all secondary. I'm not going to get into today to the challenges or the controversies swirling around. That would be both unseemly and inappropriate. But it is appropriate that this audience behind me and so many others not here consider events recently to be an opportunity, a clarion call to retired judges, to lawyers, to the bar associations, to the press, to the law schools, and the law clerks that serve so many of us, and to the members of the public, to recognize that we all are in this together. And while it is sometimes difficult to speak out, each of us in his or her own individual way can stand up. To be sure, and admittedly, the judiciary is but one of three co-equal branches, no better, no worse. And yet, as Hamilton put it, the first duty of society is justice. It is this judiciary that must discharge that duty, demonstrating, as you do every day, that justice is quite simply truth in action. Yes, this may be a turbulent period, but the challenges have not distracted the men and women of this institution, of this branch of government, from even-handedly administering justice and ensuring the integrity in our process. Excellence is a quality that is not easily extinguished. To sum it all up, I would return to the biblical injunction of thousands of years ago and quite simply say to all of us to continue to fight the good fight, to run this swift race, and to keep the faith. Thank you.